America's most decorated soldier, Audie Murphy, used to refer modestly to himself as a fugitive from the law of averages.
Audie Murphy, America's most decorated war hero turned Hollywood star, captivated the nation with battlefield courage and on-screen charisma. On the surface, his life looked legendary. Over 21 years, he appeared in more than 40 films. But behind the fame were struggles few people ever saw. And when Murphy died suddenly in a plane crash, the official explanation didn't convince everyone, as disturbing details surfaced, including possible sabotage, federal surveillance, and strange inconsistencies. One question refuses to disappear. What really happened to Audie Murphy? The Audie Murphy mystery is worse than we thought. Audie Leon Murphy, America's most highly decorated soldier of World War II, didn't pass away on the battlefield, but in a tragic aviation accident on May 28, 1971, at the age of 45. On that spring morning, Murphy was a passenger aboard a private Aero Commander 680 super twin-engine aircraft flying from Atlanta, Georgia to Martinsville, Virginia.
Did the plane burn, or is it just a crash?
The immediate area around it had burned.
The plane encountered very poor weather conditions, including rain, fog, and low cloud ceilings, as it approached the mountainous terrain northwest of Roanoke, Virginia. At about 12:08 p.m., the aircraft crashed into the side of Brush Mountain, killing Murphy, the pilot, and 4 other occupants instantly. The pilot, who had about 8,000 hours of flight time on his back, held only a private pilot license with an instrument rating, and this was a crucial qualification for flying in zero visibility conditions. The probable cause was the pilot's decision to continue flying under visual flight rules into adverse weather, resulting in a controlled flight into terrain at an altitude too low to clear the mountainous region. Investigators didn't find any evidence of mechanical malfunction before the impact, and the aircraft wreckage was located 3 days after it disappeared. Murphy's sudden death stunned the nation, causing front-page headlines and an outpouring of public grief. On June 7, 1971, he was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, attended by prominent figures, including U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations George H.W. Bush and Army Chief of Staff General William Westmoreland. In the years that followed, Murphy's widow and their 2 sons filed a wrongful death lawsuit, claiming that there was negligence in the operation and maintenance of the aircraft. In 1975, a jury gave the family $2.5 million in damages. Although the official record says that the plane crash was because of weather and pilot error, there seems to be something strange and unexplainable surrounding his last flight. Some investigators say that the accident that ended the life of one of America's war heroes and Hollywood stars definitely had something fishy going on. In the years after Audie Murphy's death, in a 1971 plane crash in rural Virginia, some challenged the official findings and reframed the tragedy as something more sinister. According to the Murphy supporters and investigators, later scrutiny of the crash raised the possibility that the aircraft might not have gone down solely because of weather and pilot error, as the federal authorities had said at that time. After the wreckage, the forensic reviews conducted outside the original National Transportation Safety Board investigation identified anomalies that were inconsistent with a routine controlled flight into terrain. These included questions about the aircraft's instrumentation, flight controls, and maintenance history. Experts who propose these theories say that some damage patterns on the plane show pre-impact interference rather than failure caused by a pilot who made poor decisions during a moment of bad visibility. But the government has not admitted to this claim. The main reason why there are questions about Murphy's sudden plane crash is his involvement in probing unethical practices affecting U.S. military veterans. Murphy was very outspoken in the late 1960s about the inadequate treatment of combat trauma, misuse of veterans' benefits, and what he believed were covert behavioral or pharmaceutical programs conducted through Veterans Administration facilities. After enduring severe post-war psychological distress himself, Murphy was privately gathering information about the poor treatment of veterans and asked for accountability, making them a potential threat to different entrenched interests. To make things worse, Murphy was being monitored, and before his plan crashed, he had expressed concern about his safety to his associates. He was under extensive FBI surveillance, and this was later revealed through declassified documents through COINTELPRO. This was probably because he was exposing the potential misuse of veteran resources and classified experiments. Supporters of the sabotage theory point to these statements, and when you combine these with the nature of the crash and the lack of surviving flight data recordings, there are reasons to re-examine the circumstances surrounding his final flight. They argue that the plane crash was investigated too fast, and relying only on pilot error as the cause leaves a lot of questions unanswered. But the problem is that there are no declassified documents or verified forensic evidence that demonstrate tampering or targeting. Aviation experts note that the aircraft was flying in severe weather through mountains, and those are enough conditions to cause a plane crash. To make things worse, even after he has passed away, Murphy's son is still looking into his sudden passing. So yes, the Audie Murphy mystery is way worse than you might have thought. And even more than 5 decades after the fatal plane crash, the battle over his legacy is now being fought in public records offices, media platforms, and political corridors. At the center of that effort is Murphy's son, Terry Murphy, who has spent many years pressing for transparency and for the government to re-investigate the circumstances surrounding his father's death. Terry Murphy constantly argued that the official explanation, which states poor weather and pilot error, doesn't account for all the unresolved inconsistencies in the investigation. After he carried out his own private research, checked witnesses, and assessed the technical reports, he maintained that critical evidence was overlooked and dismissed too quickly. He says that the government investigated too fast, and that could have caused some mistakes. Terry's investigations into his father's death might not be because of personal loss, but because he believed that his father was targeted for exposing wrongdoings involving veterans. Audie was openly struggling with post-war trauma, and he was investigating unethical practices within Veterans Administration systems and voicing concerns about secret programs that might be affecting former service members. Terry contends that these efforts placed his father in conflict with powerful interests, creating a motive for silencing him. Over the years, Terry has looked for access to declassified documents, aviation records, and federal files that he says could answer some of his questions. He also participated in interviews, collaborated with independent investigators, and supported the forensic scrutiny of the crash. The advocacy has also attracted the attention of journalists and lawmakers sympathetic to broader issues of the government, but it has not caused an official reopening of the case. Still, the family's campaign is keeping Audie Murphy's struggles under the public spotlight, revealing that he wasn't just a decorated soldier and movie star, but also a veteran deeply affected by war and determined to protect others from similar suffering. But before Audie Murphy found himself in a plane crash that unfolded into a mystery, he faced scandals, personal struggles, and problems despite his fame.
Audie Murphy, the most decorated man of World War II, who went on to become a movie star, was found dead this afternoon in the wreckage of a light plane in the hills of Virginia.
One of these happened about 7 years before he passed away, when he almost committed murder. In the spring of 1970, Audie Murphy, who was widely known as America's most decorated World War II hero, faced a dramatic and highly public legal ordeal far removed from the battlefields that had made his name. On May 18, 1970, Murphy was arrested in Burbank, California, and charged with assault with intent to commit murder, along with related counts of assault with a deadly weapon and battery, after a violent dispute with a local dog trainer named David Goffstein. The incident happened because of one of Murphy's female friends and her dog training arrangement with Goffstein. According to Goffstein, Murphy and his friend came to his kennel, physically assaulted him, and even shot a gun, although it didn't hit him during the confrontation. Police said that Goffstein sustained injuries to his head and upper body and was treated at a local hospital before being released. The allegations made headlines, especially because they involved a man whose wartime valor had been celebrated nationwide and a man with a public persona of stoic courage and moral integrity. Murphy was 45 years old at that time, and he denied the accusations, especially the claim that he fired a weapon. His defense team claimed that he was innocent. During the trial later that year, details emerged portraying the conflict as more complex than the reports suggested. Some say that the tensions had arisen over how Goldstein handled the dog and its owner, and that Murphy's involvement might have been because he was helping his friend. Goffstein's testimony has been poked and prodded. By October 1970, a jury had heard the evidence and deliberated on the charges. In a verdict that relieved Murphy and his supporters, he was acquitted of all charges, clearing him of assault and the intent to commit murder. This was one of the most unusual chapters in Murphy's post-war life, but only one of the times he had a violent outburst. Audie Murphy's post-war life was marked by intense emotional turmoil that stemmed from his extraordinary combat experiences and his struggles with what was then called battle fatigue, but what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Friends, family, and colleagues noticed that the psychological scars of World War II never fully healed.
America's most decorated soldier of World War II, Audie Murphy, used to refer modestly to himself as a fugitive.
And in many ways, this shaped his behavior long after he returned home. Almost immediately after he left the army, Murphy exhibited symptoms of lingering trauma that modern medical professionals associate with PTSD, such as chronic insomnia, recurring nightmares, and mood swings that were so severe they alarmed those close to him. He developed the habit of sleeping with a loaded handgun under his pillow. This was a practice that he maintained for years as a way to cope with persistent fear. He was afraid that the danger could return at any moment. Murphy's first wife, actress Wanda Hendricks, described volatile episodes that showed just how much his wartime experiences had affected his temperament. On at least one occasion during their marriage, he actually held his wife at gunpoint while they were arguing. And that's one of the reasons why their relationship eventually broke down. Anyone who knew Murphy at that time noticed that his inner battles weren't limited to the bedroom. His close friends and collaborators noticed that he had a fierce and sometimes explosive temper, which could flare in stressful situations long after the active combat had ended. These characteristics were surprising to fans, as they only knew about a shy, modest, and heroic Texan who performed greatly in the war. They had no idea the struggles that he faced behind the scenes.
In other news, Audie Murphy, the most decorated man of World War II, who went on to become a movie star.
Despite these personal battles, Murphy remained publicly committed to helping other veterans. he spoke openly about his own PTSD, urging greater recognition and support for those who returned from the war with invisible wounds. He has been credited for breaking down the taboos surrounding combat stress, especially at a time when such issues were barely discussed. His mental health challenges pushed him to another problem, which was an addiction to prescription sleeping pills. Audie Murphy's struggle with prescription pill addiction in the 1960s was another tough part of the war hero's life and mysteries. After returning from World War II, Murphy grappled with what was then called battle fatigue. His combat experiences left him plagued by insomnia, nightmares, and anxiety, and these are issues that dogged him for decades and often drove him toward desperate measures in search of relief. To cope with the constant nightmares and the inability to sleep, Murphy was prescribed Placidil, a powerful sedative that was widely used at that time to treat insomnia. At first, the medication was offering him temporary solace from the psychological torment that had followed him home from Europe. But by the mid-1960s, the medication went from a therapeutic aid to a serious dependence. Murphy realized that he wasn't using the pills to manage the symptoms, but he was addicted to them, and he later admitted to this situation openly. Faced with the stark reality of his dependence and determined not to let it control his life, Murphy took an extraordinary step. With remarkable resolve, he locked himself alone in a hotel room for a full week without taking a single dose, enduring the painful withdrawal process without any medical help. Such an ordeal was dangerous and difficult, but Murphy was committed to breaking the addiction on his own terms. His successful self-detox was not only a personal triumph, but also a moment of candor that was hardly seen among public figures of that time. Rather than hiding his struggles, Murphy used his experience to bring attention to the mental health challenges faced by veterans. At a time when psychological wounds from combat were hardly ever discussed, he spoke candidly about his addiction and the emotional toll of PTSD. He urged the US government to expand research into the mental effects of war and to improve health benefits for veterans returning from conflicts like Korea and Vietnam. This advocacy helped break early ground in bringing combat-related psychological trauma into public and political discourse. Aside from struggling with violence and pill addiction, Audie Murphy also had to deal with a gambling addiction, and that later got him involved with the mob. Audie Murphy's life after World War II was defined by high-stakes gambling and financial turbulence, a reality that complicated the legacy of one of America's most celebrated war heroes.
Governor Perry awarded the state's highest military honor to a late East Texas war hero.
Murphy became deeply involved in horse racing and other forms of wagering, frequently betting large sums at racetracks such as Del Mar, and developing a reputation as a passionate but sometimes reckless gambler. Rather than just owning and breeding horses, he often placed bets on races and played poker socially and for stakes with friends and other actors. At first, this part-time job seemed to be a harmless diversion, but Murphy's gambling habit contributed to a serious financial strain in his later years. Records reveal that he lost a lot of money, especially because of racing and risky business ventures. He had lost $260,000 in a failed Algerian oil deal in 1968, a setback that affected his existing tax issues. Aside from losing money in business and racetrack betting, there was another rumor which said that Murphy accidentally became involved with illegal gambling and ended up owing money to Chicago bookmakers connected to the mob. Murphy wagered across a network of racetrack bets with men who said that they were affiliates of the Chicago outfit, eventually accumulating about $112,000 in winnings that those associates refused to pay. A private investigator connected the bookmakers to organized crime in Chicago. But when Murphy confronted them in Hollywood, he was stonewalled. Because of Audie Murphy's gambling and financial misadventures, he eventually made a lot of bad decisions that caused him to become bankrupt. Audie Murphy's post-war life was marked by deep financial struggles, and that led to a highly publicized bankruptcy in 1968 that reflected the challenges he faced while away from the battlefield. Although Murphy enjoyed a successful 21-year acting career and a lot of earnings from films like To Hell and Back, his financial situation worsened in the 1960s due to a combination of gambling losses, risky investments, and mounting tax problems. By the late 1960s, the money he once commanded was all gone, and he had to seek legal protection from his creditors. Murphy's involvement in horse racing and high-stakes betting played a significant role in his financial decline. An enthusiastic but habitual gambler, he dedicated large sums to owning and racing quarter horses, often wagering on races with mixed results. In fact, some sources say that he lost over $3 million in his lifetime. These losses, combined with other speculative ventures such as an ill-fated oil deal in Algeria that cost him about $260,000, left Murphy in a precarious fiscal position. At the same time, unpaid taxes and disputes with the Internal Revenue Service added pressure, underscoring how quickly the decorated war hero's fortune had eroded. Murphy was known for never turning down a friend in need, and he often gave loans to others that were never repaid, further draining his resources. Despite all these troubles, Murphy maintained a strong personal ethic that sometimes came at a financial cost. He refused lucrative offers to endorse tobacco and alcohol products, saying that he didn't want to set a negative example for the children who admired him as a war hero and a public figure. But his principles caused him to lose a lot of income that might have alleviated his financial troubles. In fact, Murphy was on a business trip to investigate a new investment opportunity in factory-built housing when his plane crashed in May 1971, ending his life forever. After he passed away, his widow, Pamela Murphy, moved into a small apartment and worked for 35 years as a patient liaison at a VA hospital. She eventually paid off every cent of his debt to ensure his name wasn't sullied by his financial decline.
He was the most decorated soldier of the greatest generation. Talking about North Texas native Audie Murphy.
Audie Murphy's life was full of many struggles before the plane crash that's more mysterious than it seems. But in the midst of all that, he was a celebrated soldier that ended up with trauma after the war. His transition from World War II legend to a Hollywood star was one that attracted a lot of fans. After more than 3 years of relentless combat, he returned home as the most decorated U.S. soldier of the war, as he earned the Medal of Honor and dozens of other awards for valor. His most famous action happened on January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France. At age 19, he single-handedly held off an entire company of 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks for over an hour. He mounted a burning, abandoned M10 tank destroyer and used its .50 caliber machine gun to repel the enemy while directing artillery fire through the radio, despite being wounded in the leg. This action alone earned him the Medal of Honor. He has a pretty impressive combat record, killing at least 241 enemy soldiers and wounding or capturing many others during his time on the front lines. He spent about 400 days in direct combat, way more than the typical duration for most soldiers. Long before his Medal of Honor action, Murphy had already earned 2 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars, and the Distinguished Service Cross for various acts of heroism in Sicily, Italy, and southern France. He received 3 Purple Hearts for wounds, and he often refused to leave the field to ensure his unit's safety. Even France and Belgium awarded him several of their highest honors. Rather than retreating from service altogether, Murphy maintained his connection to the military in the post-war years. In 1950, he joined the Texas Army National Guard's 36th Infantry Division, where he served with distinction for more than a decade, eventually rising to the rank of major before transferring to reserve status and concluding his military involvement in 1969. Yet, the greatest battles that Murphy fought after World War II were not against foreign armies, but against the psychological effects of combat. Rather than conceal his suffering, Murphy used his own experience to advocate for others. At a time when mental health issues among veterans were stigmatized and poorly understood, he spoke candidly about his struggles and urged the U.S. government to improve care for returning servicemen. His advocacy helped draw attention to the emotional wounds of war and contributed to broader calls for expanded veterans' benefits and research into psychological trauma. Despite his shocking experiences, Audie Murphy still had a great Hollywood career spanning over 20 years. Audie Murphy's Hollywood career remains one of the most remarkable transitions in mid-20th century American pop culture. After returning home as the most decorated U.S. soldier of the war, Murphy's portrait on the cover of Life magazine caught the eye of Hollywood legend James Cagney, who invited him to Los Angeles and initially signed him to an acting contract, setting the stage for an unexpected second career. Murphy's early years in Hollywood were anything but easy. Though trained in acting, voice, and dance through the Cagney contract, the partnership dissolved before he appeared in any films, and Murphy struggled to find work in a crowded post-war industry. He honed his craft with the help of acting coaches and by studying dramatic texts, determined not to be dismissed as merely a war hero on screen. His first credited appearances came in 1948, with small roles in Texas, Brooklyn, and Heaven, and Beyond Glory. The following year brought Murphy's first starring role in Bad Boy, after financiers agreed to back the film only if he took the lead. This was a vote of confidence that helped solidify his place in Hollywood. Shortly afterward, Universal Studios offered him a 7-year contract, paying a substantial weekly salary and launching a prolific film career. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Murphy became a familiar face in more than 40 feature films, particularly in the Western genre that suited his rugged persona. He played historical figures like Billy the Kid in The Kid from Texas and Jesse James in Kansas Raiders, and delivered a notable performance in John Huston's adaptation of The Red Badge of Courage. The apex of his Hollywood achievements came with To Hell and Back, the film adaptation of his own best-selling autobiography. In a rare instance of a real-life hero portraying himself, Murphy brought authenticity to the story of his wartime experiences, and the movie became Universal's highest-grossing picture until Jaws dominated box offices decades later. Murphy's range extended beyond westerns and war dramas. He starred in contemporary action films such as The Wild and The Innocent, and delved into television with the 1961 Western series Whispering Smith. The Audie Murphy plane crash remains one of the most mysterious cases, as investigators are still looking into what happened and if there is a different explanation. Do you agree that it was because of pilot error, or do you suspect something worse? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. So, thanks for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one.